think beta readers, alpha readers, beta readers, even editors, if you have the chance to get one, they're probably the best people at identifying darlings, because sometimes there are darlings you have that you may not even be aware of.
Hey, this is Writer's Row. I'm DC Wright-Hammer.
And I'm David Gane, and we have a guest.
Hi, I'm GM Nair, the author of award-losing sci-fi comedy novel Duck and Dyer, Dicks for Hire.
Award losing?
I'm
Okay,
sure I've lost a bunch of awards.
Okay, we're going to get into that a little bit later, I think.
And with that, if you like the content we've been putting out on Writer's Row on YouTube as well as on podcast, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Give this video a thumbs up on YouTube. And if you haven't checked out our podcast, we'll have the link in the description down below. We're recycling some older material, so you can hear a lot of the old hits that we've had on this show. And get a little bit out of them if you haven't watched them, and if you have watched them, you can just be reminded of how great we are.
Yeah, I'm sure they all. I'm sure they all need that reminder.
They're all great. Everything is great.
Yeah. What are we talking about on this show, DC?
So in writing community, and it's really a concept I think has been around for a while. I learned about it from Stephen King, but the concept of killing your darlings. So we'll get into some of the definition and all that, but it's a concept that I think people hear about, they talk about, they don't necessarily understand it in general. So I wanted to open up this episode, and we wanted to bring on GM so we could talk about killing your darlings. And let's just level the playing field. GM, what does the phrase "killing your darlings" mean, and maybe give an example of it?
I think for me, killing your darlings in terms of writing is being able to cut out things that you have written that you particularly like, that you particularly love, but if those things don't necessarily serve the story or help your story, or sometimes they're even to the detriment of your story, cut them out. Kill them, put them aside, and keep going with your writing. Sometimes you have to kill the things most precious to you to make sure that the story doesn't suffer as a result.
What do you define as something that's precious, though?
I mean, that differs from person to person, I guess. For me, a lot of the darlings that I tend to kill, since I write a lot of, pure kind of comedy, not just in my novels, but I've done a lot of, sketch writing for the New York sketch scene in my past. And something I learned there is sometimes you may love a joke to death. You may think it's the funniest thing. Everybody else might think it's the funniest thing, but it spoils the flow of the scene. It may not actually land outside of a comedy writer's room, and maybe you're just better off getting rid of it and maybe saving it for something else.
Okay. And so did you do that in your book as well?
Oh, yeah, several times. Several times. There were a lot of jokes on the cutting room floor of Duck and Dyer, Dicks for Hire, which, fortunately, given the nature of the series, the fact that it is a series, it's something that I can save and maybe repurpose and use in a future book where it could be, maybe more useful or just flow with the story a little better. I've cut out whole scenes. I've cut out whole divergent plot lines that did or didn't work. I think one of the biggest darlings that I killed in writing it may not have been just a joke, but just the nature of the story itself. I worked on it for a couple, years and years to make the first draft work. And for the longest time, it was a time travel novel about just specifically focused on one, locked room murder case featuring some sort of old rich person, as they all, usually do. But that changed completely. There's still a bit of time travel in it, but it's more of an alternate universe, multiverse novel now. There's a lot of the same DNA there, but I kind of rewrote the whole thing from scratch, killing a lot of the original stuff and making it overall a better, more solid book.
Okay. So then now I want to know, and I'm going to throw this at you too, DC. Where do the darlings come from? Is it because we're kind of is it because we're pantsing it? Is it because, you know, we plotted it out and then when we put it on the page it actually doesn't land the way we thought it would? Where do for both of you are you finding your darlings come from?
Well, I'll dig into it really quick first. I think I plot and then I pants as I write the plot. I don't know what that makes me, but I meander, right? So I will go in a lot of different directions, and I have to ground myself and say, not necessarily even on the first draft, but always go back to what is the purpose of this chapter. And typically there's 2 or 3 or 4 goals, and you got to see, and it also depends on what your goals are. Is the book supposed to be tight? Is the book supposed to meander? Because there is some room there. I think there's a spectrum you can have. And you got to see what serves the story and the chapter and the characters and the scenes that you have at a particular time well enough. Are you trying to show that a character has this certain thing in their background? You might need to meander in the past, and if you really need to show that, try to do it as tightly as possible. Get in what you need to get in, and then move on from there. So I think it really depends. They come from just trying to put words on the page, like just trying to be productive, and having something to work with from there. And some things we just really like because it made us feel good when we wrote it, so it sticks in through edit after edit, and then maybe it can go if it's truly a darling. I'm probably one of the worst people to talk to about this because I try to make my darlings fit, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I don't know. What do you think, GM?
Well, I mean, I'm actually in a very similar boat. I'm doing NaNoWriMo right now, and I'm basically rough or vomit drafting my second book. And before I even started, I had a very, I'm a very hardcore plotter because a lot of my stuff is very self-referential and things go back and forth. And I had a very clear idea of how things were going to proceed in this novel, where you start, what's in the middle, what's in the end, etc. And as I'm writing, I write some really great scenes in the beginning that by the time I reach my close to the end mark, like that stuff doesn't work anymore. I really like the material, not only from a scene perspective, but again also from a joke perspective. There's some lines I really want to get through, but I gotta just cut them because things have taken a huge turn, and the story no longer works if I leave them as is. So I think that's kind of where I am with that.
So then when you guys are cutting things, are you holding on to them? Are you saying goodbye to them all? Do you have a process?
Well,
I save everything.
yeah, my darling. So every day I write, I start a new copy. So everything is there. I don't know where it is, but yeah, no, I literally, this is the new day. I save a new copy and I keep writing. It's dated and time stamped, and it has not failed me over 4 years. So,
Wow.
and honestly, the very first scene I ever got as a writer that I put on the page didn't work for my first book, and it became, some people might say in book 2, it became sort of a side story or a side plot that could be considered somewhat of a darling. I worked really hard in book 2 to tighten that up. There's a lot of storylines in book 2. There are. That's just the nature of the book. I had to make it bigger than what book one was, sort of open up the series to take it where I wanted to take it. And so one of the critiques of book two is that, hey, there's a lot of things going on here. In the end, I tried to weave them all together, and most people feel like it was successful, but I've had people who say, I can't follow everything that's going on here. So again, I don't know that I'm the greatest person to talk about killing darlings, because I got like a house full of darlings. They're just hanging out doing what darlings do. And so
you've built a book out of darlings itself.
I think my whole series is just a series of darlings.
I think saving your darlings in a separate document somewhere else still counts as killing them.
Okay.
Just keep them in a locked room and slowly pump in carbon monoxide until they suffocate. But I think saving is good, because sometimes if your darlings may not work for something, so you gotta, gas them, and then but sometimes later they'll work for another book, or you can repurpose the idea wholesale for something else.
Well, I think that's crucial to, people say, oh, kill your darlings, kill your darlings. When you're writing draft one, like, darling the hell out of it if you need to.
Yeah.
Get it out of your system, and from that, it might shape the story differently, and darlings actually become main plots, things like that, things that are crucial to moving the story forward. So people shouldn't walk away from this conversation like, oh, I need to write bare bones. I need to make sure that I just say then this and then this and then this and then this. Like, there's some meandering that can go on, and you should do a lot of that in your first and second draft even. Then you need to see in the third and later drafts, what are you trying to convey in every chapter? What are you trying to convey in every scene? And what can go? And sometimes that looks like subplots. Sometimes that looks like minor characters that you could really just stick a main character in there and do the exact same thing. And now you've thrown out you've gotten rid of an extra name. You've gotten rid of giving extra background on this character that doesn't matter. And you kind of go, you just make everything a little tighter that way. So definitely do it. Write all of the darlings that you need to write, but then just fine tune it as you go.
Yeah, you can't kill your darlings if you don't have darlings to kill.
There you
go. So get it out and then kill them.
Yeah, by saving them.
Yeah. I don't think I have a lot of darlings. I usually write pretty bare bones, but my writing partner, she loves darlings, and she puts everything onto the page. So I usually have, like, I call it the odds and ends file, where I throw everything in there, every cut that I do, everything like that. And she always she often calls me the golden scissors, because I cut so much of her stuff. But I also tend to find places and reuse them in other parts of the story. She'll do a fight scene, and then I'll be like, well, it doesn't really work there, but we'll bring it in here. In our current book, a character was supposed to fly to someplace, and she took them on a drive. And I was like, what are you doing? These pages upon pages of all this driving. And it just, I didn't know what to do with it.
Because I felt bad. Did they eat a lot of donuts on the way? Donuts and coffee, right?
Did it take place in 1905? Maybe then they can't fly anywhere.
Well, yeah.
Reset the whole thing in 1905 and everything is fixed.
It's modern day multiverse vagina, right?
Yeah. So anyways, what I ended up doing was I was gonna cut it, and then I came up with a reason why the character needed to drive. And now it actually works better in my mind than what we used to have. And it's kind of opened it up a lot more, and we learn a lot more about a character because of it. And yeah, like, every time I think she's thrown me a darling, I always find somewhere that it becomes a better story because of it. So we even have a character that shouldn't have, been anything and turned it into a main character. So that has like come across several books because of it, and they weren't even in the original outlines. So yeah,
So you're resurrecting your darlings.
Yeah, I'm the opposite of killing them. I'm like, hey, let's use this material and make it a fantastic part of our story.
Well, and I think that's darlings can come out of a lot of things, and I think especially as a first or a writer that's just getting started, like you'll get stuck on over describing transition scenes. And you're like, well, I got to fill in this transition scene. Well, if they're driving the car, they need to talk about something. And if they're talking about something, we need to go back in time. And if we're going back in time, we need to talk about. And so before you know it, when you really could have just said, and then they drove to this place, like it could be as simple as that. But I mean, I've read several books where like turning a door handle took like a page and a half. Like, I mean,
how does one feel about the door handle? How does the door handle feel about being turned?
For a page and a half. Like, it's almost invasive at that point. But
what is the backstory of the door handle?
Right.
Who killed the door handle's parents?
Right. Why is the door handle a curmudgeon? Mm-hmm. No. Don't get me wrong. If people like that, where there's room for that in certain genres and in certain stories, and having some of that, I'm not saying that's always a darling, but those are certain things where when you come back to the scene, what's your main goal? Like if you can sum up in this chapter, XYZ happens, that's going to keep you grounded and know as you start to veer off. Now, maybe XYZ happening is also, we got to know why, we got to know the characters, why are they making this happen? So we've got to have a little bit of either explanation or backstory or something. And so you might need to go off course just a little bit, but it's really part of the course to some extent. It's like taking the little shortcut around the tree that takes you to the same place anyway, gives you the background, gives you all that. And so, I would say, again, in the first drafts, go off path. Like, have fun with it, enjoy yourself as a writer, and then as you're going back through it, do you really need to talk about how their mother was, worked a sewing machine back in the 1910s, and that's why now they have a fondness for handmade clothing? Like, I mean, again, some genres, some stories that might be important. Is it for this one?
Right. No, I mean, I agree with you. I have that kind of mentality of writing, okay, each chapter has to have X, Y, Z has to happen, and then move on. I'm a bit of an underwriter when it comes to my first draft, where I just write what needs to be done, plus a bit of background. And then once I'm done with the first draft, I go back in and add more things, flesh things out. And that's when after that, that's when I start killing all these darlings. When I find that things I've added in don't flow right, things that I've added in just stop the writing cold, or like the flow of the story or the flow of the narrative. I'm trying to be, in my writing, as conscious as I can about how the reader is going to be reading it, with the cadence, the spacing of the jokes, the back and forth. Does it take away from the story? Does it add to the story? Am I just putting a joke in here to put a joke in here because I like it? And I think killing my darlings may not start, as the first or even second step, but just, probably closer to the end for me.
Wow. That's kind of interesting. Leaving it that long, I guess.
Well, and I think by the time you get to the end, you've looked at it hundreds of times. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the importance of having, if you have alpha readers, people who are reading as you kind of produce it, if you have beta readers, they can read it when you're done. That's helpful to get your bearings even before you give it to an editor. So the problem is, and I've heard this a lot, you really got to find beta readers. Like, okay, if you find punctuation, fine, I guess, but mostly you want to emphasize to a beta reader or an alpha reader, like, does this story make sense? Are the characters likable? Is the the plots, is the plot really driving itself forward like it should, or do you think I take some turns here or there that could be tightened up? I think that's important because the things we love, you get 3 or 4 other people's opinions and they might hate them. Like, they might say, in fact, this is the biggest weakness of your work here. If you take this out, and they just go from sailing on the ship to the island and they don't kill that shark in the middle, like,
but the shark was the best part.
The shark is named Darling. They have to kill it.
Right.
It's
the shark is a metaphor for the obstacles that get between you and an island. I don't know. But
I don't like metaphors. Cut it.
Really? No metaphors, huh? Which is actually a metaphor. Never mind. So I think, and obviously by the time you get to like a professional editor, which I recommend everybody, so I'm not saying go out and spend a lot of money. This is a sensitive topic for some people. We've talked about on many episodes. But you should have somebody who has a pretty keen eye look over your work. I do recommend beta readers even before that, before you get to an editor. And by the time you get to somebody who's fairly more professional, whether you're paying them lots of money or not a lot of money, whomever it is, they're going to help you. If they're really worth them, if they've been around, they've done this kind of stuff, they're going to help do some of this extracting, because it's tough for us to see. What happens in this chapter? Well, what happens in this chapter is they fall in love, and they then they realize they can't stay in love, so then they start, fighting, But what really needs to happen in this chapter? That's what professional people, editors who have been around, can actually tell you. No, this chapter serves this purpose, and that means we can trim this much from it. That means we can take out this side story, and we could just tell it this way. So I think just, really finding that person in the end before you, and that's typically for independent authors. You wouldn't necessarily get that editor. If you were going the traditional route, you would stick with the beta readers. I mean, you could get a content editor if you wanted, but if you do enough beta reading before you're going to pitch your book, that's typically, as far as I see most people take it, they don't actually pay for an editor. If you have an editor friend, great, they can be a beta reader for you. It serves the 2 purposes. But no, I think
it's that lucky.
Right, exactly. So I just, I think I'm a very big advocate of having somebody who is fairly professional look over your work, one way or another.
Yeah, I think beta readers, alpha readers, beta readers, even editors, if you have the chance to get one, they're probably the best people at identifying darlings, because sometimes there are darlings you have that you may not even be aware of. So a second, third, fourth set of eyes is immensely helpful.
Can I also bring up and I think this really works with the term kill your darlings. It's the stuff that you really want to hold on to. What happens when you have a alpha, beta, or an editor say, yeah, this is something that needs to cut, and you're like, no, I don't want to cut it. How do you approach that?
That's a great question, because I've had that experience. Not only have people told me to cut certain things that I've really liked and I really wanted to keep in, I've gotten conflicting advice from like 4 or 5 different people. My novel has a prologue, which is number 1 on things to cut in terms of, what the conventional advice of what should you cut. No prologues, garbage, toss them out. Some people said, cut it, you don't need it. Other people said, I really like the prologue. It's great, you actually do need it. It sets up so much stuff that's intriguing. I like the prologue, so I went with the people who I agreed with.
And others will say, just turn it to just make it chapter 1.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's not the point.
No. No, it's not, because especially in my book, my prologue and epilogue mirror each other and have context that's shared between them. So to make it chapter 1 and chapter, I don't know, 30 something, whatever, it didn't feel right because it wasn't really within the same context of the story. So I opted for My Darling, I guess.
And I think DC really is happy about that.
Well, I saw it. I was excited that he had a prologue.
Yeah.
I've never done an epilogue. I'm going to be doing an epilogue in my next book. I'm pretty excited about that. I don't care what people say. No,
I like epilogues. I'm a big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe post-credits teaser, so epilogues work just fine for me.
Yeah.
Wait a second. You like superheroes?
No. Just the post-credit sequences.
Oh, okay.
I don't watch the movie.
He doesn't actually watch the movie. He just watches after the credits.
Okay. And I realize this joke probably won't work because it'll be cut off by the way Skype does it. But you've got like a superhero hand sticking into this shot.
Oh, yeah. He has Flash.
Yeah, I've got the Flash. There's an
definitely cut off for our podcast listeners, David.
Oh, yeah. I don't even think. I'm so rude.
Yes.
Okay. Anyways.
No, but number one, when someone says to kill a darling that you either didn't know was a darling or just really love and you appreciate, I think number one, it's fine to be offended a little bit. I'm just going to say that people can be like really protective of their writing. It's personal. But you have to get past that. And you have to see why someone says that they think you can get rid of it. And then that's how you develop as a writer. It doesn't mean you have to cut it. You can stand your ground and keep it. But I would also say don't forget about it. And as you get a readership and as you get reviews and as you talk with people about it, see what they think. See if they give you the same feedback. See if it's actually one of their favorite parts. And try to grow as a writer as a result. I think that's the other thing, too, about all this, because you might keep something in there and it is a highlight of your book. You might cut something and people say, hey, this area could have used more. So there's that other side of it it really boils down to people's opinions. And that's why getting as many of those as you can before you publish is important, because then you can start to do some analysis, some statistics, average them out, and then kind of go with your gut as a writer. And so that's kind of, someone's like, hey, you should probably cut this. What do you mean cut it? Like you can clutch your pearls. I give you permission to clutch your pearls when someone says to kill a darling. It is a darling after all. They're so sweet and cuddly and all that. But then try to wade through that because you can't do that for everything. Some things are going to have to be cut. In the end, nobody writes a perfect first draft. They all have some areas that suck, typically a lot. And some things are going to have to go. Not everything necessarily has to go. And you just kind of have to weigh that. And that's the evolution of you as a writer.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as pretty objective in that regard. If people say this doesn't work or this doesn't make sense or you'd be better off removing all this, I try my best to be as objective as possible, because I know when my friends or other writers who I work with on occasional and my writing partners, they send me a draft of what they're working on. I take a red pen and just start hacking at it. And to the point that I think sometimes I'm a little mean in what I say. It's like, no, remove this, move it later, delete it, not needed. I feel a little bad, but gives me an inflated sense of self-satisfaction. So that's great. So I'm objective when I'm trying to do a work for others. So I try to be as objective about my writing as well.
Nice.
Well, and from if you've got whole storylines that could be taken out, and you've done the work already, and they're good, but they're just not usable in a book. From an author perspective, start doing short story add-ons and tack-ons and prequels and little bridge pieces that you can sell for 99 cents or even give away for free that don't necessarily spoil what's in the bigger books. but can give you an in to people who want to see what you're made of. And maybe you have a really cool darling that ends up being the gateway drug to your books. And so that's how reusable these things can be. So yeah, clutch your pearls. Oh, what do you mean I have to cut that? And then start thinking strategically. Can that be in the sequel? Can it be in a prequel? Can it be in a standalone? Can it be in this or that?
I guess the lesson ultimately is don't kill your darlings, chop them up, and store them in the freezer.
Right. But yeah, well, you can vacuum pack them and then sous vide them later to be delicious and tender in the future. So
exactly. I mean, however you want to prepare them. Yeah, that's up to you. That's not what this episode is about, guys.
Right. That's the next episode.
Preparing and eating your darlings.
Well, this took a turn.
Right. With some Chianti and some fava beans, right?
For a second.
I'm not even going to try the noise.
No, we're not going to be doing it.
No.
No, that was he actually improvised that. That was sort of stuck in there. He just did it. That darling got to stay.
Sometimes improv works.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works.
Well, and a lot of comedies, like especially with the best comedians, they have a loose outline of what should happen in the scene, and then they just let them go. And that's why you get so many different like DVD extras, Blu-ray extras of just scenes that didn't work out that are hysterical. But the good editor came in and was like, yeah, we're going to cut that. We only really, we recorded 12 versions of this. We need that one.
Yeah, riffing can go on forever. Like I said, when I was working, on, sketch comedy, in a writer's room, we had maybe an hour's worth of working on material. It took like 3 hours because we were just constantly riffing and making jokes that at each other, that ultimately would never work, but it's always just a lot of fun to watch, as a separate aside.
Awesome. Okay. Are we done, DC?
Yeah, we can be. I think we've killed this darling to death.
Think we have.
Killed it to death.
It was really good.
Yeah,
well,
really deadly.
Not killing, but never mind.
We could go on forever.
Yes.
Instead, but then we have to cut it.
Yes, we are going to kill the rest of the darlings that this episode was going to have. And we are going to shift to any kind of promotions we want to do. So, GM, what do you got?
Well, just standard. My current novel, Duckett and Dyer Dicks for Hire, is available on Amazon. And if you go to any indie bookstore and ask for it, they should be able to order you a copy as well. I also post a lot of nice little tidbits on my website, ds-df.com. There's a newsletter you can sign up for, and which is just a whole bunch of jokes that I put out every month. Any updates on Duckett and Dyer and the sequel, which I'm currently working on for NaNoWriMo, Duckett and Dyer 2, the 100% solution.
When are you hoping to get it out? The second
April?
one? April?
Yeah. I'm a madman. Hopefully, that's why I'm doing NaNoWriMo, is to just flush out the rough draft.
Awesome. How about you, DC? What do you have?
I'm going to plug our podcast. I'm going to go back to that. So Apple, Google, Spotify, Breaker, Pocket Cast, Radio Public. There's a few other ones. I have never been a podcaster, and now I am, so I know things. And we are recycling older episodes, and eventually we're going to be doing some podcast exclusives. So I would say definitely subscribe to your favorite podcast outlet. If there's one we're missing that you want to hear our podcast on, let me know, and I can try to get us on there. But it's actually been a lot of fun to have two outlets now, YouTube and the podcast. So go subscribe. Link in the description down below.
Why don't you plug your website, just because you haven't done it lately?
Oh, Wright-Hammer.com. It is the place you will find the best deals on the Between Two Minds series.
Awesome. And I'm going to plug Kunyos and Gane because I like to plug kunyosandgane.com. We have our newsletter. You can buy our books there. I think we have a little bit of swag left on there, but not a lot, or not swag merchandise. You don't get it for free unless I'm in a generous spirit. And I think I also have a couple of copies of some other authors' books, WB and Don, and yeah, find it all in there. And I might be doing some giveaways in the near future from our store as well. So,
all right. Thanks, David. Thanks, GM. We appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Pleasure to be on.
Thank you very much.
Next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care, guys.